I'm Caroline Jones. I wonder just how far you or I would go to help a family member facing sudden disgrace and jail in the worst possible circumstances. Former schoolteacher Josephine Greensill believes she would still be in prison but for the determination of her family to clear her name. When finally she was acquitted, the judgment concluded that there was a real likelihood her accusers had collaborated and a real possibility that the evidence against her had been concocted. This is her story.
Oh, this all looks lovely. You've all gone to a lot of trouble.
The last few years have been absolutely harrowing, nerve-wracking, all round terrible.
There's nice muffins there that Renee made. What were they?
Jo is a very confident and happy person, very assertive, liked to be in control, bubbly, exciting sort of person to be around. I would never ever have imagined that Jo would end up in prison. Completely, absolutely unbelievable. Since all of this has happened, she's afraid to go out, always sad, always on edge, entirely different sort of a personality.
I know.
I'm really angry that this has happened to her and our family. She was innocent, and the scary thing is if it could happen to her, it could happen to anybody.
I try not to feel angry because I don't think it's helpful. I feel sad and upset that my life has changed, and I don't know if I'll get back to the happy person that I was. I just want answers. I want to know why this has happened to me. Why would someone make accusations that weren't true?
It's outrageous that it's been 2.5 years since her acquittal, and there has been no apology for what has happened to her. No one has been held to account, and we want a full investigation into this, and we won't stop until we get that.
Would you like chicken stir fry?
Yeah, do you want me to do the rice?
Oh, yes, thanks. Yeah. That'd be great.
Josephine is a retired school teacher. She has 5 children and 5 grandchildren. She's done a lot of volunteer work in her community. Just a very average, normal life.
Your knife's a bit sharper?
No, it's not too bad.
I never thought that this would happen to me, that I would be charged and convicted of such a dreadful crime against children. I've worked with children my whole life.
This all began 7 years ago. It was out of the blue. Josephine was at home with her son Danny when there was a knock on the front door. It was the police, and they had come to arrest Josephine. Former students had accused her of sexual misconduct from 30 years ago.
I was shocked. I just couldn't believe it. I just kept saying to the police, this is not true.
She's never been accused of anything beforehand, like not even anything at all, nothing minor. And to just hear this, we were just in complete shock.
When I was in the car on the way to the police station, I thought, there's been a mistake. I'll sort this out when I get down there. I was quite naive. I hadn't had dealings with the police before. I was very nervous being in a police car with 3 police officers.
Do you remember anything else about him?
Yeah, he didn't like schoolwork. He had to be sort of prodded to do any work. At the police station, they took my statement over about 3 hours.
Is there anything else that you can recall about these 2 particular boys?
No, not specifically. They were students in my class, and yeah, I did give them a bit of extra attention because they needed it academically.
Did you sexually assault these boys?
I did not sexually assault those boys, and I've never ever sexually assaulted a child ever. I think pedophiles are the scum of the earth. I think that anybody who hurts a child in any way at all should be punished.
You're going to be charged with indecent assault against a male. You're not obliged to say or do anything unless you wish to do so.
She was charged with 20 counts of sexual misconduct and paedophilia of 2 students. These incidents were supposed to have occurred 30 years earlier.
Do you wish to say anything in answer to the charge?
No.
She was white as a ghost when I first picked her up from the police station. The 2 men that accused my mum, I've never really hated anyone before, but these 2 people I think actually do hate them for what they did to my mum.
When Josephine rang to let me know that she'd been accused of this crime, I just burst into tears. And Joe said, "I'm innocent." And I said, I know that you're innocent, but who would do such a thing? Who would accuse you of this, and why would they do that?
It's certainly changed since I was here.
The accusers were men in their late 30s. They had accused Josephine of sexual misconduct and full penetrative sex when they were 8 years of age.
Actually got the school photo with me. Gosh, look at you, you're so young.
Josephine was their grade 3 teacher, and she was 28 years old at the time.
There's the first accuser. He's unrecognisable now as an adult. And this is the second accuser.
They said that she had assaulted them in her classroom, in the storeroom opposite her classroom, in her home, and in a tent in her backyard. Josephine was married at the time to Greg Sumpton. He had a sandblasting business, and they had 3 children. She loved teaching. She was a normal, happily married woman who was raising a family and paying off a mortgage.
I think my classroom was over there, that way behind.
Josephine met the families of the accusers through her role as a teacher, and they became friends and they would socialise together.
The first accuser occasionally came to my house because his sister, who was 14 at the time, liked to babysit my youngest son. I used to tutor the second accuser in my home. His mother had asked me would I do that because he was falling behind in just basic English and maths. One of the main accusations that they made, or they said occurred in a tent in my backyard when both of the accusers stayed overnight. This came about because there was a school camp organised for the grade 5s and 6s, and they asked me, why couldn't grade 3 go on a school camp? And I mentioned this at home to my husband, and he said, oh, well, we can put the tents up in the backyard. They can go camping in the backyard, which we often used to do with our kids. My family, my husband was there, my children, and the 2 accusers and myself, we had a barbecue. As it was getting darker, I went inside and changed into a nightie, and the boys changed into their pyjamas in the tent. And I came outside and I just sat across the entrance to the tent, and we all just talked and laughed about school and whatever the topic of conversation was.
I was a teacher for many years, and my sister Annette still is a teacher. And these days it would not be considered appropriate for teachers to have children stay over at their homes. But in those days things were far more informal between families and teachers. And as the children were friends with Joe's children and the families were friends, it all seemed very harmless.
Looking back, it probably wasn't a good idea to be talking to students wearing a nightie, even though it was a full-length nightie and I was totally covered. They were a couple of kids, they were 8 years old, and who would have thought that they would have made up some accusation about the whole thing when it was all completely innocent. My husband was in the house nearby, in the kitchen. If anything had been happening, my husband would have known about it.
Josephine and Greg divorced in 1981. They remained good friends, and unfortunately, Greg died in 2004, 4 years prior to these charges, and so of course he wasn't around to give evidence to support her. Josephine later on met Vic Greensill, and they married and had 2 boys, Danny and Tim.
But I do have some clippings here of the accident if you...
I don't think I've seen those, Jo.
Oh, you probably haven't. Vic was a train driver and he absolutely loved his job. Well, sadly, in 2006, Vic was killed in an accident at a railway crossing between a train and a truck. Vic was a passenger on the train, he wasn't driving, and it just turned my life upside down, and of course his 2 sons. Dad would have been so proud of you, Danny.
Josephine was still grieving when these sexual allegations arose, so it was a dreadful time for her, and in fact, still to this day, she's grieving. At the time of Josephine's arrest, we had no idea that Vic's death might have had something to do with the allegations.
The only lawyer that I'd had anything to do with was the local suburban lawyer that I'd made my will with. So I went to him and he sat me down and said, "Look, don't worry, I'll find someone to defend you, everything's going to be all right." In hindsight, perhaps it would have been wiser to have gone to a criminal lawyer, but I didn't know of any at that time.
The trial started in May 2010 and ran for 11 days. 2 accusers at first glance did seem to corroborate what each other was saying, but there were significant differences at times and other things that were so closely the same that you'd have to wonder whether they had colluded. They accused her of full sexual penetration, and to me that was just a ridiculous thing, and I doubted whether it was physically possible for children of that age anyway.
A former Victorian primary school teacher who molested 2 boys in the late 70s was today sentenced to 5 years jail.
The jury found me guilty of 9 of the 20 charges, and all of these related to the allegations about what happened in the tent. When I heard the guilty verdict, I just sat there numb. I don't think I moved for quite a while, because that was totally unexpected. I expected to be acquitted.
We couldn't believe it. I remember turning to Josephine and just looking at her face, and she was just scared to death.
It's very uncommon in this circumstance, being a female teacher, obviously. But the 2 victims are very happy it's all over and they can get on with their lives.
I really don't know why the jury found Josephine guilty. I think perhaps one of the things was that Josephine didn't give evidence. She was really unwell and sick, and was very frail.
My barrister had advised me that my record of interview was pretty good, that there's nothing much I could add to it. I said nothing happened. And the prosecutor was a very loud, overbearing personality, and I was worried that if I did say anything, it might be taken out of context.
I think there is a perception that if the accused person doesn't take the stand, they must be guilty. So in retrospect, I think it was a bad call for Josephine not to take the stand.
I was 59 when I was taken to jail. I was absolutely terrified. Because of the nature of the crime that I was convicted of, I was placed in protective custody with all sorts of people who had committed murder and other very serious crimes. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. As a convicted paedophile, I wasn't allowed to have photos of children, even photos of my own children and grandchildren.
When I visited my mum in prison, it was hard. She didn't have her makeup done, her hair done. She just didn't seem the same. She was kind of slower than she normally is. She just wasn't the same person.
One of the most distressing things about the time in jail was that I missed important family events, like my auntie's 90th, a few 60ths that I missed, including my own 60th birthday. I had 3 grandchildren born, and one of my sisters got breast cancer, and I wasn't there to support her. And sadly, my son-in-law passed away, and I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. No reason, just no, you can't go. It was really tough knowing that all these things were happening, really important things in my life, because I love my family, and that I couldn't participate in them.
Look at that, Josephine's
so happy.
Yeah.
Oh,
We'll get it back to that.
My sisters Mary and Pauline and I were absolutely determined to get Josephine out of jail and to clear her name. And to your mum, and Josephine. The 4 of us were adopted from different families at an early age. Mum and Dad were very loving and devoted, and they just wanted the best for us. And we just knew that no matter what happened to each other, we'd always be there to help.
So this was the pending application for leave to appeal.
I was really optimistic that there'd be grounds for an appeal, and then when we went to visit the QC, we were told that it would be very unlikely that Josephine would be acquitted, and I was just shocked to hear that.
When he came out with that line about spending more money would be like spending good money after bad, the lawyer said that for an appeal to succeed, it had to be on matters of law, and it appeared that the case had been conducted properly. We felt that somewhere or other there had to be a way, there had to be someone who believed as much as we did that she was innocent. There had to be a way of getting her out, and we were going to find it.
This is some footage of the main accuser. The QC had suggested that we hire a private investigator and find out all we could about the accusers, which is what we did. And the investigator put us on to a specialist criminal lawyer, which was where we should have gone in the first place.
Hello, Mary. Hi, Annette. Thanks very much for coming in. It's very rare that I would be so strident in my attitude as to a person's innocence. But right from the very outset, we thought that there was something untoward about that conviction. Well, the thing that struck me most about Josephine's case is the complete implausibility of the allegations. The fact that they, as prepubescent children, claim to have had, firstly, penile sexual intercourse with Josephine, and then in their account describing how they've ejaculated. And we know that there's been no medical evidence called at the original trial, but their description of the events really beggars belief.
That's right.
But Josephine was so sure that
Just being innocent was enough.
The evidence in this case just didn't stack up. The complainants said that they stayed overnight at Ms Greenshill's house. They were subjected to trauma, and yet as 8-year-olds they said that they never discussed it between themselves, and that just didn't ring true.
We should have gone to you in the beginning, Rob.
There was no medical evidence, no forensic evidence, and no eyewitnesses. One of the critical things for us, there were inconsistent accounts provided by the accusers. When you look at, firstly, when the complaint was made, 30 years after the event effectively, and that the complaint surfaces after they become aware of that compensation claim. It looked like there were possibly 2 motives. The ex-wife of the first named accuser had said that he had told her of an incident in 1979 in which Ms Greenshill had accused him, when he was 8 years old, of stealing from her purse. It seemed to us that he bore some grudge against her, and he said perhaps he should track her down and sue her. There was a possible second motive. After Ms Greenshill was convicted, the first accuser had made a claim for compensation. Ordinarily in a victims of crime application, it's the state that pays compensation. Upon conviction by a judge or a jury, it's the individual who pays compensation. Ms Greenshill's husband had been killed in an industrial accident, and there was publicity at the time that she'd received a settlement payment in the order of $1 million. That then laid open the prospect for a substantial claim for compensation. We wanted to examine the compensation claim and try and elicit fresh evidence. And a critical piece of evidence that was revealed was the fact that when the first accuser made a claim for compensation, he went and saw a forensic psychologist and psychiatrist about what was said to have taken place. And in that recounting of the history of the events, he did not say that there was any sexual penetration in the tent. And that was a glaring omission. It was central to the case, and it formed one of the very strong foundations as to why the case, the conviction, was unsafe and unsatisfactory.
Josephine's appeal was held in November 2012, and Mary and I attended the hearing. Josephine didn't want to attend because she had been let down before, she was nervous, she had been told that she'd be shackled, that she'd be wearing handcuffs, and she didn't want to be seen in public like that. It was incredibly nerve-wracking waiting for the judge's decision, but when they came back and said that she'd been acquitted, I was shaking, I was so happy. I embraced the barrister, and it was just the best day.
It was an absolute relief. I just wanted to be able to grab Josephine and hug her and squeeze her and yell and scream and maybe even swear.
The essence of what the Court of Appeal said was that the case was just completely unsafe and unsatisfactory. They were incredulous as to the nature of the evidence. They gave 9 main reasons for their decision. One of those reasons was that there was a likelihood of collaboration and possible concoction in the evidence that had been given. The inconsistency in the evidence of the men, the possible financial motive, the implausibility of the allegations themselves. And in light of what the Court of Appeal has said, this case should never have gone before a jury.
I was just in total shock. I had agreed to ring my son at a certain time to find out the result of the appeal. He said, "Oh, Mum, you've been acquitted, you're coming home." And I burst into tears and said, "Oh, Danny, you're not joking, are you? Don't joke, this is too serious." And he said, "No, it's not a joke. I'm coming to pick you up." When I left jail, I was 61. I'd served 2 years, 5 months and 13 days. I was still crying and upset and happy, all mixed emotions rolled into one. It felt very strange to be sitting in a car and had the road moving beneath me. It was a very strange experience. It was just, well, it hadn't really sunk in that I was free.
I was so happy. I'm very grateful towards my aunts for helping my mum every step of the way, and we weren't very close at the start, and throughout the whole thing we just got closer and closer as a family, and it's brought us all together.
When I got home, there were flowers in the house and presents. Oh, wow, aren't they lovely? Champagne, friends, family members, anyone that could get here in a hurry was here.
And here's to freedom, Joe.
Freedom.
Josephine was just stunned, very, very happy, but just stunned and just looking around her house like she didn't recognise it.
Oh, fantastic.
In total disbelief that she was in her home and with her family all together.
I'd forgotten what my home looked like. I think that was part of the coping process, being in jail, where you just survive where you are. Rob, this is for you. I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done for me.
Well, that's completely unnecessary.
It's been 2.5 years since Josephine has been released. She suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. She has regular counselling. She has panic attacks and anxiety and at times some paranoia. She's not the person that she used to be, and we're all very worried about her.
One of the things that's caused me most trouble is that the complainants can make a complaint of this nature and there are no consequences for them.
She feels that she has been acquitted but not exonerated. She's still the centre of innuendo and rumour. Her reputation is shattered, and that's the most important thing to her.
Normally you go back to the investigator.
She's very disappointed that to this point there has been no charging of these accusers, and she believes until that happens she won't be able to move forward.
And I would think that there ought to be some investigation. We've talked about this.
My sisters and I have been pursuing this with the police. We have been told that a special crime investigation unit will consider whether to investigate these men. We have not heard from the police since January of this year, and we want something to happen. This has been a dreadful miscarriage of justice, and she deserves to have justice.
I feel like they've done this awful thing to me. I've been convicted, I've served time, and I've been acquitted of all charges, and they're walking free in society, and I think that's wrong. I feel like they've got away with it.